Hello, and welcome to Understanding and Using Social Stories. Thank you for taking the time to view this recording. My name is Eimear Kennedy. I'm one of the specialist speech and language therapists here on the Children and Young People's ASD team. So let's start with thinking about our learning aims for this session. I would like participants to be able to understand what a social story is and why they are used with children with ASD. We want to understand how a social story is written, understand when and how to use a social story, be able to write your own social story by the end of this. And also I'm going to show you some examples of typical social stories. Firstly, let's think about what is a social story. I'm sure many of you have heard of social stories or may already be using them. So social stories were developed by Carol Gray to address the needs of people with ASD. They are short descriptions of a particular situation, event or activity, which includes specific information about what to expect in that situation and why. A social story should help us to understand the perspective of the person with ASD, as well as discussing the perspective of others. So Carol Gray's own definition of what a social story is a social story accurately describes a context, skill, achievement, or concept according to 10 defining criteria. These criteria guide story research, development, and implementation to ensure an overall patient and supportive quality and a format, voice, content, and learning experience that is descriptive, meaningful, and physically, socially, and emotionally safe for the child, adolescent, or adult with autism. She goes on to say that social stories are patient descriptions of life's many topics and frequently include information that you or I would take for granted, information that we may mistakenly assume everyone knows. So the 10 social story criteria are mentioned throughout this presentation, and full details can be found on Carol Gray's website, and the link to that website is shown at the end of the presentation. What are social stories used for? So, social stories can be used to develop self-care skills. So that can be things like how to clean your teeth, wash your hands, or get dressed. They can be used for social skills, for example, sharing, asking for help, saying thank you, or not interrupting. And also academic abilities. They can help with sequencing, planning, and organizing. Social stories can help someone to understand how others might behave or respond in a particular situation. And importantly, they can help others understand the perspective of an autistic person and why they may respond or behave in a particular way. They can help a person to cope with changes to routine and unexpected or distressing events. For example, a change of teacher, moving house, or an illness within the family. Social stories should provide positive feedback to a person about an achievement, something they're really good at or a situation that they handled really well. 50% of social stories should celebrate the person, and that will help develop self-esteem. Let's think about why the social stories work. Well, they contain only relevant and socially meaningful cues. They are written in the first person, so they are personal to the young person or child. They are visual and concrete, so there's more there that helps the person understand the story rather than just the words. They provide structure. They can help to reduce anxiety, and they should be consistent across people and contexts, so the young child or young person knows what to expect. So now let's think about writing a social story, and for this we're thinking about Carol Gray's 10 criteria. When writing a social story, the parent, the teacher, or the clinician who's writing the story is referred to as the author. And the person whom the story is written for is referred to as the audience. Firstly, you need to consider the goal. So for Carol Gray's first criteria, she says that authors follow a defined process to share accurate information using a content, format, and voice that is descriptive, meaningful, physically, socially, and emotionally safe for the audience. Think about the purpose of the story. Think about that before you start. For example, the goal may be to explain to a child why it's important to cover their mouth when coughing. Now think about what the child needs to understand to achieve this goal. For example, they need to understand why covering their mouth when coughing is important. so that it stops germs from being spread, which may help make other people sick. The next step then is to gather information. Collect information about the situation you want to describe in your social story. Authors gather information, firstly, to improve their understanding of the audience in relation to a situation, skill, or concept, and secondly, to identify the topic and focus of each story. And like I said previously, 50% of all social stories should applaud achievements. Think about where the situation occurs, who is it with, how does it begin and end, how long does it last, and what actually happens in the situation and why. Because a particular outcome is not guaranteed, in most situations, it's really good to use words like sometimes or usually in your story. The next step then is the actual structure of the story, and that is referred to as 3 parts and a title. So a social story has a title, an introduction which clearly defines the topic, a body that adds the detail, and then a conclusion that reinforces and summarizes the information. So just like any story, it has that 3 parts: introduction, body, and conclusion. Criteria 4 is that it should be tailored to the individual needs of the audience, or the person, child or young person who the story is for. So social stories should be tailored for the individual abilities, the attention span, the learning style, and the interests of the audience. So you might like to use photographs, picture symbols, or drawings with text to aid understanding and increase motivation. Criteria 5 then is a patient and supportive voice and use of specific vocabulary. A social story uses patient and supportive voice and the vocabulary that is defined by 5 factors. 1, use of first or third person perspective. So that could be I like or Sam likes. The second is the use of past, present, and or future tense. The third is using a positive and patient tone. The fourth is literal accuracy. So that means that it's very clear, it's not at all ambiguous, and it does not use colloquialisms, idioms, or other sayings which the child might find difficult to interpret. And the fifth, the meaning is accurate. The story is correct, it's true, and it's clearly understandable. Criteria 6 is thinking about answering those WH questions. So a social story should answer the relevant WH questions, things like where, when, who, what, why, how. Criteria 7 and 8 falls under this one, that describe more than direct. So a social story is comprised of descriptive sentences as well as coaching sentences. Each social story describes more than it directs. We'll look more closely at those types of sentences and break that down better in the next slides. Criteria 9, review and revise. Reviewing the story regularly allows you to make changes in order to keep it relevant and can make sure that it's still effective for the child or young person. And criteria 10, and she's added 10 other points here, is her 10 guides to implementation. So Carol Gray advises that 1, plan for understanding. So make sure the story is pitched at the right level for the child or young person's understanding. 2, plan story support. So who is going to read the story to the child? Plan that story review. How often are you going to review the story? And plan a really positive introduction. And I'll talk a little bit more about how to introduce a story to the audience later. 5, monitor. So is the story still effective? Do any changes need to be made? Has the objective been achieved? And therefore we can move on from that story. 6, think about how you organize the stories. So it can be helpful to keep the stories together in a wee ring binder, particularly if the child has a number of stories, so they can be easily accessed. 7, mix and match your stories to build on new concepts. 8, so thinking about story reruns and sequels to tie that past, present, and future. So, do you need to go over other old stories? Do you need to add a second part or third part to a particular story? Number 9, is recycle that instruction into applause. So once the child has had success with the topic of the story, they've achieved whatever the objective of the story was, then you can change it into a celebration story. So something that they've done really well, something that they've managed to overcome. And 10, stay current on your social story research and updates. And again, Carol Gray's website is useful for this, and I will show that link at the end of the presentation. Moving on now to thinking about how are we going to write this social story. So the first thing we need to think about is the types of sentences that can be used in a social story. So there's three main types of sentences to use, and those are, as you can see, descriptive, perspective, and directive. Descriptive sentences define the situation, where it occurs, who is involved, and what they're doing. And it usually answers those WH questions. So for example, it might be quite factual, like something like Halloween is on the 31st of October. It might be something like, I like to play on the trampoline, or sometimes it rains at break time. Then your perspective sentences, these describe the reactions and the feelings of those involved in a particular situation. So for example, in response to that first sentence of Halloween is on the 31st of October, you may then say, lots of people like to dress up at Halloween, including my friends. Or in response to the trampoline one, my brother and sister like to play on the trampoline as well. And other examples could be, when I line up the rest of my class, my teacher is pleased. And then lastly, your directive sentences. So these suggest what the person should do or say, and they should be gently directing without being controlling. For example, I will try to line up with the rest of my class. When I feel angry, I will try to take a deep breath and count to 10. Or, it is okay to ask an adult for help with my work. You can also add a control sentence to identify strategies the child will use to recall the information in the story. So this little example kind of shows you those types of sentences. Sometimes a person says, I changed my mind. And that's a descriptive sentence, that's describing the situation. This means they have one idea, but now they have another idea. So that's the perspective of that person who has changed their mind. I will try to stay calm when someone changes their mind. So that's our gently directive sentence to help guide the young person in how to deal in those situations. And the last one then is a control sentence, which actually gives an active sort of strategy that the young person can use when this situation pops up. So when someone says, I changed my mind, I can think of someone writing something down, rubbing it out, and writing something new. Some important points to remember. Most important are the descriptive and the perspective sentences. And social stories should follow a ratio of at least 3 to 5 descriptive and or perspective sentences for every directive sentence that you use. So for every one of those sentences where we're gently sort of guiding the young person to what it is, the objective of the story is, you need to ensure that you have 3 to 5 descriptive or perspective sentences. And that ratio remains the same, regardless of the length of the story or the ability of the child. Here's another example, and the title of this one is Getting My Turn to Talk in Class. There are lots of children in my class who like to talk at the same time. It is hard for a teacher to hear one child if everyone else is talking too. When I want to talk to the teacher in class, I will usually raise my hand and sit quietly. The teacher will usually call my name to talk if I raise my hand in the air. I may have to wait for my turn to talk. Here's another example about going to Grandma's house for Christmas, and we all know that times have changed, particularly Christmas and different holidays can present some challenges for young people with ASD, or they just might need some more adaptations. So this is a good example to use. Today we are going to Grandma's house for Christmas. There'll be a lot of people at Grandma's and it might be noisy, it might be loud. We will eat dinner and open presents. If the noise bothers me, I can ask for a break. I can go to the spare bedroom or I can listen to my music. I can have visiting grandma. So what's good about this one is that it offers that little strategy. So when that child or young person maybe feels uncomfortable or overwhelmed, they know what they can do to give themselves a break. This next example is taken from Carol Gray's website, and it is called Safety Wherever I Go. Wherever I go, there is something or someone to help keep children safe. Wherever I go, there are places with fences, ramps, rails, walkways, doors, or locks to help keep children safe. Wherever I go, there's safety equipment that helps to keep children safe. Things like helmets, life jackets, or seatbelts. Wherever I go, there are signs to help keep children safe. Wherever I go, there are laws to help keep children safe. That's one reason why children wear seatbelts in a car. Wherever I go, there are rules to help keep children safe. When I'm at school, my class forms a line to walk safely from one place to another. Wherever I go, there are people who help to keep children safe. Parents and grandparents, crossing guards, teachers, police officers, and firefighters all work to keep me safe. Wherever I go, there are signs, equipment, laws, rules, and people working to keep children safe. Wherever I go, there's one more person who may help keep me safe. They will always be with me every second of my whole life. That person is me. So just a nice positive story, teaching children about some of the things that we have in the communities to help keep them safe and to think about their own safety. Now that obviously is taken from Carol Gray's website, so there's a little bit of American language used in that as well. So let's think about some top tips for when you are writing your story. Use appropriate language, good print size, visual supports relevant to the child. So that will be all in your assessing of the child's needs and their understanding and their learning styles. That will guide you in how you're going to present it. Remember to have that introduction, the main body, and the conclusion. Try to write in the first person of present tense as though the child is describing the events. Actually, it's a great idea to get the child involved and to write the story together if they are able and willing to do that. It gives them that kind of ownership over it. It makes it so much more personal and, you know, that direct perspective of how they interpreted a given situation. Use really nice positive language. Avoid phrases such as I must not, I am not allowed to, I will not, I will never. Instead, use things like I will try to, I will try not to. Avoid abstract words, which can be hard to define. So things like nice and cheeky or kind. Try and avoid words like always and never. You know, there's really definite, concrete words. Try to use things like usually, most, sometimes. Remember to say what you mean and try not to use phrases that could be interpreted literally or the child may not understand. So things like keep your hands to yourself. You need to give a direct instruction of what to do with hands. You know, like I mentioned previously, things like idioms, colloquialisms. Present the story in an attractive and a motivating way. So use things like pictures, photos, drawings, color, and that's when it's really good to get the child involved too, I suppose, you know, their own pictures and photos, their own drawings, their preferred colors. So there are many different topics that you might choose to write a social story about, and it'll be personal and relevant to the person with ASD. This slide and the next show some popular topics which may be relevant. So the first one there, my family is moving. Well, that's a big event and a big change in any person's life. And so our young people with ASD might need that little bit more preparation. So it's usually a good one to do. The other one is the fire drill. So that could be used to prepare for a fire drill at school or even to prepare a child for when a fire alarm might go off unexpectedly. Social stories can also be used to teach strategies to help a child in a given situation. So for example, how to calm my body can be used to help the child learn what to do when they're feeling anxious, overwhelmed, or frustrated. And there are other stories may be used to help prepare a child for a specific event. So for example, when fireworks are set off for special events or parties, particularly I suppose around Halloween, that could be useful for some of our young people. So let's think about now, how are we going to go about introducing this social story to the audience of the story? So do this with patience and reassurance and in a really relaxed setting. So don't use a story for the first time just after the child has been upset, overwhelmed, or had a meltdown. So just sit them down and honestly explain, I wrote the story for you, or I have this story about snack time, or, this is the story that we wrote together. It's important to kind of limit distractions. So, one-to-one with the child, no TV, radio in the background, and just focused on the story. Read the story together. Use a positive, casual, and comfortable attitude. Sit next to each other with the adult slightly behind the child when you're reading. And don't introduce too much language or information when you're reading. However, if the child wants to discuss something, if he wants to go over the story or wants to discuss topics related to the story, then go ahead. And read through the story once or twice on that kind of first reading. It can also be helpful to read the social story just before the social situation is likely to happen. So if, for example, there's a story about playtime, maybe read it just before going out to play, as long as the child is nice and relaxed. Those stories about the fire drill, for example, when you know that there's a fire drill that day or the day before, you could practice a social story the day before and the morning of. Similarly with events like Halloween, fireworks, you could be doing that for a few days leading up to an event and on the day. So you will need to read the story regularly to start with and gradually fade this over time as the child learns the information or expresses, oh, I know all that now. So remember that you may need to adapt the social stories as you go because things change. And like we mentioned previously, they may then achieve the objective of the social story so you can then turn that into celebration. Even when you've stopped reading the story together, try and keep the story accessible. So I mentioned about keeping it into a binder or something like that, like a little file or folder, so that the child might choose to read it themselves independently or look at it independently. If they have a number of social stories, it can be helpful to keep them together like that in a place where the child can access it. So some references and useful websites. So I have referred to Carol Gray a lot throughout, as she is the creator of social stories, and that's her website there, www.carolgraysocialstories.com. And there are lots of resources on there. There are some free resources, some paid, and you can learn a bit more on that site. If you're looking for information in general about ASD and many related topics, your best sources of information are things like the National Autistic Society, which is www.autism.org.uk, the Middletown Centre for Autism, which has a fabulous range of resources and trainings, www.middletownautism.com, Autism NI, which is autismni.org, and there's a site here called autismlittlelearners.com. And they again have lots of free resources as well as some paid resources, and Twinkle, which is similar as well. So thank you all very much for taking the time to view this recording. I hope that it has been helpful, and maybe it's something that you can go back to and refer back to as and when you need. So we really appreciate your honest feedback to help us to adapt and change these virtual sessions, because we want to be able to meet your needs as parents and carers as best we can. We would be really grateful if you could complete the questionnaire that is in the link, via the link in the email or on the website. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.